Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call the special Mayor's Leaders Table meeting to order. Our clerk today will be Ms. Karen Robertson. I'd like to first recognize we're gathered on the traditional territory of the Snuneymuxw First Nation. Today's Mayor's Leaders Table will be held in accordance with Community Charter and Council Procedure Bylaw 2018, number 7272. I want to give a special welcome. I think this is Ms. Bopal Singh's first attendance as our new Deputy CAO to the Mayor's Leaders Table. Welcome. Welcome back from Powell River, lovely as it may be. It's not Nanaimo. Introduction of late items. None. With respect to the agenda, Bob has asked that we add Housing First Plus, so I'm going to suggest we put that as B, 5B. For agenda items, if that works. Motion for adoption of the agenda as amended, then. Moved Bob, seconded Richard. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. We have no minutes to adopt. And the first and most important item is the presentation and review of draft Accord documents. Donna's going to introduce that, and I just want to say thank you very much to Bob, to Colin, and to everybody who's been working on it. Been attracting a group of very able, knowledgeable, thoughtful, caring people for several meetings, and gave many of us a chance to actually have a look at the facility that we've never seen before. So it gives us some comfort about the potential of oil spills in the province. So in any event, Donna, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First off, I want to start by thanking everybody at this table for participating in the process so far. We've had two what I believe to be incredibly productive meetings. But I want to be specific about what the meetings have been to date. The first two meetings of the group have been specifically around forming the Accord, and they have spoken directly to what our values are and how we're going to be working together collectively. I think we've made some great progress on that. Attached to your agenda today would be the document. And thank you to Colin at the Prosperity Corp for getting this. We only met on Friday, and then to get this on your agenda. So thank you to staff for getting this out to us so quickly. Hopefully I had a chance to read through it. It's been a more comprehensive process, I want to say, than I actually thought it would be initially, but I'm glad that it's going this way. There's been lots of very generative discussion at the table. There's been lots of feedback in the background, and I truly feel we're going to come out with an incredibly excellent document at the end of the day. It will not be 13 pages long like the information that you got. This is the background material for that. We have two more sessions planned, although I don't have solid dates around that yet. Those next two sessions, in the next session, you're going to see the organizations at the table come forward with the important or most relevant pieces of their strategic plan will be what the next discussion actually brings to the table, which will be part of what's going to actually be the living document attached to the Accord itself. I'm going to ask Colin to run us through the documents that are in front of you here first, and then we can follow up with any questions or comments or feedback from this table. Colin?
Wonderful. Thank you, Donna. So what you have in front of you is basically the story of how we've come from what was a sort of conversation at this table into putting it into something that's coordinated action. We've met monthly, as Donna mentioned, as a steering group or as parts of that. We've run a couple of workshops across the anchor institutions and built this work directly on top of City Plan as well as Canada's Quality of Life framework. So everything you see here, as we've mentioned before, complements strategies rather than duplicating them. What I'll do is walk us through some of the key sections of the update and then pause at a few points for any discussion or feedback. And so if you turn to the second page, the Accord itself, the structure of the Accord, organized as a short, principle-driven document. It's something clear, durable, practical is the intention. Opening with a preamble and introduction that ground the work in Nanaimo's moment of opportunity that we've discussed, leadership of the Snuneymuxw First Nation and our institutions, and then moves through 5 substantive sections. The first, the values, which is really about who we are, principles, how we act, the ambitions, what success looks like, and then as Donna mentioned, the portfolio, which is really how we move into action. And then finally with an invitation that calls others to align, participate, and invest in the Accord. Dave, I don't know if you wanted to just take a moment to talk about this structure. It was you and I that met and...
Yeah, no, I went through and I agree. I think the fundamental part is this notion of a permanent foundation and then the living and adaptive. I think, Colin, you just nailed it. And that's what this is about. I've got some comments I want to make, because Colin and I have had some interesting chats as we develop this, and just to say that, not to get too far ahead of you here, but this is a solid piece of work, Colin.
So I guess, there were some action items at the end, but to sort of hit them in order here, the prompting question around this section really would be, do folks feel like this is the right architecture that would stand the test of time and keep things moving? And if there's any concerns about scope, length, or how it will sit, I thought maybe we just pause for a second and does anybody have any feedback on the structure of the document?
Well, I think in terms of the structure that as I mentioned, we've had those conversations. I think, again, recognize that this is a different way of doing things, but I think it is the future. Notionally collaboration, notionally creating a foundation, a solid foundation. Too often, as some of my comments, don't have to say them and hold them, is that everybody talks about action, 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 action. Words are important in how they're framed and how they're built. And it's the foundation with the words is critical. So yeah, I'm really, really pleased to see how it is structured. Thank you for that.
Great. So seeing no others, then section 3 is all about the shared values, who we are. We've been talking about the values being the cultural DNA of this initiative, who we are at our best. You'll see 6 statements here: collaborative by design, ambitious by nature, inclusive on principle, entrepreneurial in spirit, adaptable and accountable, and rooted and regenerative. These are what we've tested through our first couple of sessions. We've refined them, and they now reflect, I think, the cultural commitments that the anchor institutions who've been participating have told us that they actually want to live by. So the question here would just be, before we move on, do these actually feel like our values? Do they describe the culture that we want to be known for when we act together? Is there anything that you think is missing or is odd in its inclusion? I'm looking to the group and seeing none. Great.
I'm just gonna make a quick comment to say, we've spent 4 hours as a team at the table in these discussions, and I really feel truly this reflects our conversation. So, and I think it's a very powerful statement, so I'm really pleased about that.
Great. So then section 4, the guiding principles. If the values are the culture, I think the principles are sort of the code of conduct, how we behave when we work together. We have move like a system, reward coordination, signal seriousness, invest in what multiplies, evolve with evidence, and welcome new strengths. So if these are the rules of engagement for collective action, the way that we ensure credibility, pace, and visible progress. Again, I would just pause for a second to see if anyone has thoughts about refinements or additions. But this is what we've put together with feedback from those 4 hours of working together.
If I may, I just absolutely love the phrase, these principles act as our compass. Truly they do.
I can't help but comment this morning when it says welcome new strengths in light of what Mr. Trump did yesterday, welcoming new global partners. My enemy's enemy is my friend now. As the Prime Minister has hinted to shift towards China away from the United States. So it's fascinating times.
So the next sections there, mentioned that we moved from 20 ambitions that we had crowdsourced through our first session and worked on them all together last week, refining them down to 12. Over the past couple months, that long list of 20, they're organized around 5 themes: prosperity, health, environment, society, and governance. And each one describes an enabling condition for prosperity rather than a problem to be solved by prosperity. So they've been simplified, they've been made measurable with some suggested metrics, and aligned with both the quality of life framework and the city plan. I won't read each line, but a few of the highlights. For prosperity, positions Nanaimo as a confident, coordinated place to invest, emphasizes leveraging major public projects for broader community benefit. Health is about reframing healthcare not as reframing healthcare, as an economic driver and affordability as a foundation for prosperity. Environment is about tying resilience, mobility, and ecosystem restoration directly to economic competitiveness. Society makes reconciliation, learning, and culture engines of prosperity. And then governance focuses on visible collaboration and a city hall that acts with entrepreneurial partnership. As I mentioned, each ambition includes 3 headline indicators that are concise, public-ready metrics that we can communicate externally. So pausing once again, if you look at these 12 ambitions as a whole, do they capture the right enabling conditions for prosperity? This was the work we just did Friday, and so I imagine some folks might have had some thoughts over the weekend, and this is the first time we're showing them outside of that meeting. Is there anything missing or overstated from your perspective?
Very quiet group this morning. Is the coffee not strong enough? Perhaps we should have Richard Harding here to make it.
The danger here is I just take a whole bunch of tick marks away from this, and so. But if there are further thoughts after, of course, this is an iterative process, and the intention is that we're working with feedbacks.
Bob, please.
If I may, I mean, you've heard this before, Colin, but I do think we should endeavor to prioritize housing a bit more in that list. As we'll talk more later, I mean, I think it's a very fundamental piece to the whole puzzle. So I would like to see it as a separate category, but even if not separate, maybe just make it more bold.
Okay.
And I think also reference it across the spectrum of housing.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Good, thank you.
Any other thoughts, feedback, input?
Anyone else? Dave?
Yeah, well, just a question. I've got just some minor, I think we're gonna revisit that anyway, so I won't go into it now.
Okay.
But fundamentally, this is, it's 95% there in my view. Just a couple of words here and there to strengthen it, but yeah.
I must say, I'll be intrigued to see how you boil it down. I think that's going to be a challenge. And I don't mean this as a criticism, because I think it's necessarily comprehensive, but it's a lot.
Fair.
If I can just comment on that, I agree it's a lot, and I also think that's the beauty of this process, is bringing the group of people that we have to the table, because it will be a change in how we do things and how we look at things and what the culture is around those things. It's about a collaborative spirit moving forward, and about leveraging, the assets and economic benefits that we can bring to the community as individual organizations, but acting as one, and how one makes us stronger than being individuals. So I agree that it's a lot, and I commented that, I'm hoping it's not 13 pages that we'll boil it down. But I think the process has been very interesting, and the feedback at the table from the various organizations about what they see the important components are, and it gets me excited to see what the possibilities generating from this document actually are.
Dave?
Thank you. So I would like to, for the record, make a few comments. I talked about how words are important, and too often we focus on action, right? And action is important. I'm a planner, but action needs to be framed by words. It needs principles, values, and accountability. And we have that embedded in this document. Action needs to be seen as integrated, coordinated, and holistic. We have that embedded in this document. Measurements of success need to be both short and long-term, holistic and foundational. We have those embedded in this document. This work addresses all of those requirements and needs. It ticks all the right boxes in my view. Comprehensive, foundational, inclusive, holistic, visionary, forward-thinking, and action-oriented. It's got all of that embedded in it. So here I am, sitting here, lots of gray hair, been around the block. Few people say too many times.
Nothing wrong with gray hair.
And I don't think going around the block too many times is a bad thing either. Anyway, I do, and you've heard me say this before, it's time for new approaches by local government. 80% of the population lives in urban areas. The bulk of the economy is structured and functions in urban areas. Quality of life in the country is defined by urban areas. So this work is central to the long-term success for Nanaimo, the region, and its citizens. There's no question. Its foundational elements are solid, absolutely. Great piece of work, Colin. And I don't say that lightly, and I don't say those kinds of things often, but great piece of work. And it's been a pleasure having our chats. And you're such a great listener. I mean, people need to know that. Great conversations. The next step in identifying, this is the ground now we face, right? In identifying projects, in my view, should actually follow reasonably naturally. I'm a matrices guy, and Colin and I've talked about that next step. I do think it should, But having said that, not necessarily easily, right? It's going to be a challenge, but challenge is good. Because through challenge, you actually solidify ideas. When you solidify ideas, they resonate and have deep roots. So I'm really happy with that. And my view is that the process that's coming next will then do the complete circle on this. And I'm absolutely convinced of that. So just appreciate the opportunity to participate in this one. This is really, really foundational. Thank you.
So then I guess assuming that we're aligned on values, principles, structure, and ambition, the next step is to move the framework into action. As Donna mentioned, that's going to happen over a couple of meetings with strategic sprints, as she's been referring to them. So asking folks to show up and not walk through a 50-page strategic plan, but rather hit us with that top 2-3 projects that have the most cascading benefits. And as Dave has mentioned, then moving that into a prioritization matrix that allows us to measure those against our values, principles, and opportunities for fundable projects. And so if this table is comfortable with it, I think the next step really is for us to report back with those meeting dates, but also know that we're available. And so the role of the Prosperity Corporation in this has really just been to do the homework in between. This is a Mayor's Leaders Table initiative. It's all input and feedback from the leaders who are sitting around this table and joining those sessions. So if you have questions, thoughts, suggestions, please reach out at any time, because we're just meant to be collecting that and building it into the document. So with that, I'll stop and say thank you very much for the support, the kind words, and your continued efforts.
Thank you. Mr. Sims, any comments this morning?
You know, I thanks, Your Worship. I appreciate the opportunity, and I echo Dave's comments on the level of heavy lifting that Colin's done on this. I think, and I think reading it, it's and contemplating how we've arrived here, it really is kind of foundational to the unity of the community and building community. And I think that's where Nanaimo has the opportunity to shine. I think we're pretty good that way as well, but putting some language around community building, community wording, or unity is really critical here. So I tend to agree. It'll be interesting to see how it goes, and I appreciate that it builds off the very good work of City Plan and how that's really foundational from a corporate point of view, but also a community point of view as well. So yeah, that's about it. Thanks.
I just want to say that there's been lots of talk in the last couple of years about sort of Nanaimo's time and everything's working together, falling into place, et cetera. And I must say, I've had a few conversations this week, including with Julian Daly yesterday, who's the head of Our Place in Victoria, their largest, I'll call it, nonprofit social organization that runs treatment centers and provides food and care and all kinds of things. And he was talking about at some point, he'd rather like to move to Nanaimo as well. And I just use that as an example. Very much you get the sense that everyone's discovered us, and it's going to come quite rapidly, and the numbers show that. And yes, the economy's in a somewhat state of flux with Mr. Trump in the White House, et cetera, but you can't get past the fundamentals of who we are, where we are, and I just think it's thus even more important that we have this and be doing this work right now. Because how shall I say, I never surfed and I'm not much of an athlete, but the big wave's coming, and are we going to ride or to get swamped by it? And I think that we're getting prepped to ride the wave. So I just want to say thank you to everybody for what's been accomplished. I had the sense we might have a fairly short meeting this morning. There's another item on the agenda, but nevertheless, I think the work that's been done the last couple of meetings outside of the Mayor's Leaders Table, as Donna says, have been wonderful and a very good group of people. Dave, please.
Well, I think we need to say this, that we wouldn't be sharing these ideas in this moment if it weren't for your leadership, quite honestly. We're sitting here because you called us together, so thank you for that.
Thank you very much. We have wonderful staff here at the city who are moving us rapidly into the 21st century. Mr. Horbaczewski, nice shirt, by the way.
Thank you, Your Worship. I appreciate that. I picked it specifically for you. Just as reviewing this document, and I was fortunate enough to partake in one of the meetings, and it was it was a great meeting to hear the thoughts and go through that process. From a university perspective, the Accord, what I really appreciated was the recognizing a city of learning, really aligning with what the university is trying to do in driving lifelong learning, innovation, and talent acquisition, and bringing in and supporting the economy through our programs. The university, as you know, is going through significant changes, and it's nice to see that this is aligning with the direction that the university is going with, again, recognizing our mandate or our, as we're legislated as a special purpose teaching university, and creating those skills, those hands-on resources that the city needs to develop and move forward. So just wanted to put my comment in there from a university perspective as well, Your Worship.
Thank you very much. I think as many of you know, we have a health conference coming up, in early November. I can't remember the exact date. I'm sitting on a panel with the ever energetic and ever present Donna Hayes. And one of the topics, obviously, and the driver is the whole concept of the role that healthcare plays in driving the economy and vice versa, and attracting talent. So I think there's some tremendous opportunities, notwithstanding the dearth of, appropriate facilities that we're all challenged by. Again, it's all sort of coming together. Anything further on this? If not,
Mr.
Donna,
Mayor, if I can just
please.
make maybe a final comment. All of you here know that I was in Ottawa at the beginning of this week. And I just want to speak quickly to why this particular piece is so important. I'm there representing the Port of Nanaimo and the work that we're doing on Vancouver Island. And as I mentioned to many of you when I first came in, this is my second time there this year. But 2 years ago when I was there, nobody at the table knew who Nanaimo was. And that conversation in the last 2 years has drastically changed. And for organizations like the Port to be able to speak about what our strategic plan is and what we want to bring to economy and to community and to Canada as a whole, because quite frankly, when we're there, we speak about the impact of the Port of Nanaimo and what impact it has to our entire country. We need solid foundational documents as a community saying, we back this as a community. We back that strategic growth and that strategic planning. It's these kinds of exercises and documents where we come together as a community that do a couple things. They make us unique to other communities that go before government and talk about projects they want to bring forward and actions that they want implemented, and that we can speak to it from a perspective as our whole community is behind us. This isn't a single organizational conversation. And that makes us stronger at those tables because we can prove that we're different and unique and that the opportunities that we bring, and when we speak about all of Vancouver Island, the 1 million people who live here, the 32,000 square kilometers of land that we represent in Canada. When we can speak with a strength of foundation that says this is truly community organized based, these are the values under which we're working, this is how we're partnering, we bring those unique opportunities to those tables and we set an example for other communities. And I have to say, it makes me really proud to be able to stand there and represent us and to say that we have all these pieces in place because they aren't seeing that everywhere else in our country. And I can tell you right now, when you're in Ottawa, you really feel it. It's time to be proud to be Canadian. It's time to stand up and say that we can provide these opportunities to the people that live here. And then to be able to take this back. And I truly believe that when we reflect back, it affects conversations like housing. It affects the homeless conversation. It affects our child poverty conversations, that this is the fundamental work that we're doing here. So I'm really proud to be part of this process, and I really believe we're leading the country in these types of conversations. So I just want to sort of end this conversation on that note that, being a leader in Canada, I'm really proud that this table is doing that kind of work.
Thank you very much. All right, Mr. Moss, please.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Donna, for starting us down this path because that was an important starting point. Good work. I wanted to try and drag the conversation back to Housing First Plus. This table's dealt with it on a few occasions back in September of 2023 Dave provided a very excellent summary as to why that was important for our community. We reviewed it again in March of 2024 and talked about it, and we're kind of inclined that we should recommend to council that they adopt a more robust housing first policy. And so here we are again in late 2025. And unfortunately, while as a city, we've done very well in terms of market housing and met our objectives there, what we haven't done is met our objectives in terms of non-market housing. And I'd still like to make the point that we need to do some things differently there in order to achieve adequate supply for shelter housing, supportive housing, and affordable / workforce housing. I think those are really critical goals for us as a city from a social point of view and an economic point of view. They're all tied together. So I wanted to bring it back to this table. Dave is the expert in this, not me. I see it from a slightly different point of view. But if we really want to stand out as a city and achieve the objectives that we're setting out, housing is a critical piece of that. And I think we need to take a different approach than we have in the past, and perhaps that other municipalities are taking. I think there was, a general belief that maybe this should be the responsibilities of other organizations other than the city. It's my view that if we want to get the attention of senior levels of government, it has to be led by the city, but of course supported by those other organizations who are very active in this community. But if we really want to achieve the funding and support from senior levels of government, I think the city has to have the point person that we support. So with that, for start of a discussion, perhaps I can pass it over to you, Dave.
I'm not going to make that. I'm going to resist comments about dogs and bones.
Okay.
So we hadn't discussed putting this on the agenda, so that's great. I'll be very brief. You've heard me talk about this before, but we will reiterate that for me, in my practice was always successful because I observed, noted, and took ideas back to clients, communities, from looking at successful interventions in other areas and locations. And I continue to do that now in terms of the homeless file. And so, guess what? Just came back from Europe. Extensive travel. I'm an urbanist. Cindy and I don't do tours. We do our own tours. We do our own agenda. We establish where we're going, how we're getting there, and how we do it. And we travel with the masses. That's how we do it. Bus or trams or trains. And observe. I mean, she's observing the shops, and I'm observing the urban environment. So it works really well, because she's noting along, looking at dresses and clothes over there, and I'm looking around seeing who's doing what where. So all of that to say that one more time. So we're in Poland 12 days. 12 days in Poland. And I'm trams, I'll take a tram across the city just to see places I'm not going to see. I just want to observe and wander. One homeless person in Poland, 12 days. In a city of 600,000, one homeless person. Another city, 800,000, never observed a homeless person. Another city, almost 1 million, never observed a homeless person. And I'm looking, and I know what to look for, right? So that always impacts me. And then Switzerland, actually in Basel, I saw 2 homeless people, 2 instances, no, 3 times, but it was 1 person twice, so two. And then I met with Jörg Dittmann again. Now, you won't remember unless you read my report, that he's the expert in Switzerland, not that there's a lot of expertise required. So Jörg and I got together again, a great guy. He's a director of an institution on urban change and development. And their focus now is on youth, actually, he said. But so I said, how are your numbers now? Because when I talked to him in 2023, they had done a 2020 coming out of COVID study. They thought this is the way the Swiss think. They're always anticipatory, and rather there's a problem, they actually anticipate, will there be a problem? So when they do a study, and I mentioned that. So in 2020, they identified out of 8.65 million people. You've heard this before, 2,200. Which is 0.02% of the population, whereas we have 1% homeless here. In any event, I said, so how are your numbers now, Jorg? He said, well, I said 2,200 in 2020, what are they now? He said, well, actually, they're less. So in the largest 8 cities, they've done a whole bunch of studies since then, 600 identified as homeless. 600 people in the 8 largest cities combined. In the case of Basel, they have 60 shelter beds. They had 60 shelter beds when I saw them in 2023. They have 60 shelter beds now. That's all they need. That's all they need. Everybody else is housed. Housing First Plus. And the plus being the wraparound supports. So we talked about, there's in Switzerland now, their focus on housing, as I mentioned, is youth, because as they say, and he told me this in 2023, they watch youth carefully because if they're on the street for 6 months, they've lost them. So they intervene immediately. And the reality is youth don't trust the system, so they have set up processes where the people that talk to the youth are kind of the youth. And the other thing he mentioned was that the schools are absolutely on top of monitoring students. So if they see a student who's potentially in crisis within the institution, they alert those that are focusing on youth and just to have a conversation to see how they're doing. But the whole focus in all of that is to keep people off the street. So the other thing that he reconfirmed one more time is that their whole focus there, and then I know this is true in Finland and Sweden as well, is that, and Germany, is that you keep people housed. Because as soon as they end up on the street, then they're potentially succumb to all of the stuff on the street. So it was just interesting to see that reconfirmed that, this wasn't a one-show pony in 2023. They have a consistent process of Housing First Plus, with ensuring people are housed, and then secondly, ensuring that the wraparound supports are there for those who need them. I just two things. So the reality is that, they're in way better shape, obviously. They don't have the problem. But the reason they don't have the problem is because they made some early on policy decisions back in the 90s when heroin was just a joke in Switzerland. Like it was just a huge, huge issue. And that's where they brought in the 4 pillars, including enforcement. That's another issue that they're really strong on, that, as Jorg said, that you don't see dealers out there. It's not that there aren't systems. Kids are. He said, yeah, the Swiss kids are on social media, and they it's in the park. They go to parks, and you can get some drugs there. But the police they're there, and the guys dealing drugs, they're gone. They're in jail. That's it. You don't see them on the street anymore. So that enforcement piece, he confirmed, is another key part. The other key part is that as he said to me, in our view, local government is absolutely the central delivery point to address housing. And there's no question, and I've talked about this, the tax system's much more, very different there. That allows the cantons, in the case of Switzerland, to deal with issues they identify as issues. But having said that, he said, and he kind of looks at me, and Dave, like if your local governments aren't leading this, I don't know how you're ever going to deal with this. And then the last point is that I put together a slide for a presentation. You haven't seen this one, but I'll try and describe it for you. So think about XY axis, and think about, this one is about Finland. So this end of the, on the continuum, this is late 80s, mid to late 80s, 90s, through to 2024 here, okay? And a number of homeless. So in Finland, they had incredible homeless numbers. and now they're down here. Like, they don't have a lot of homeless in Finland, okay? Canada, on the other hand, has gone the other way, okay? And then there's, and with that graph, I have another one. And the graph that I have is number of social housing units that each country has. So in the mid-'80s, Canada, on this one, had around 14% social housing. Finland had basically none. In 2024, we've reversed. Canada has 3.5% social housing. Finland is at 12%. So you lay the one graph on the other, you've got this X. It's like a target. The X is a target. Like, and I'm not saying that it's not 100% of the solution. Nothing ever is 100% of the solution. But no one can dispute the fact that there is some kind of relationship there between Finland's homeless numbers going down and their social housing numbers going up, and Canada's social housing numbers going from here to there, and their homeless numbers going from here to there. That's where, I mean, I just shake my head at this stuff. So all of that to say, and Bob and I talk about this, let's take time to learn what others are doing, and no disrespect to the city. I've been told we're doing housing first, but it's not housing first plus. I know it isn't. I've done enough work in this area now, and I continue to do it. I continue to talk to people in Europe. In Europe, it's now doing York's put me onto this. It's a 25 city study that a researcher out of Belgium is doing, and he's going to link me into this fellow. But York thinks this will be the most comprehensive EU study undertaken on housing in Europe, and should be really quite helpful. So I have to find out when that's coming out and all of that stuff. Anyway, thank you for listening to me one more time.
Thank you, Dave. Lisa Bopel Singh, then Mr. Moss, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. And this is a fascinating topic because, you know, my prior role with you included the Health and Housing Task Force. And Dave, you know, you may or may not know, I grew up partly in Bristol, England, as well as the West Indies. So I've seen all kinds of social issues. I had the privilege of having a friend of mine who is one of my colleagues from university in England, meet with her in Montreal. She was presenting at a conference. And I asked her, how are things in the UK? Because we were watching people who were struggling with a number of challenges on the streets of Montreal. And one of the things that's an interesting correlation in all these pieces is the opiate crisis, which is very different in Europe than it is particularly on the western seaboard of North America. And one of the things that we've seen is the housing first approach that came out many years ago doesn't work quite the same anymore when you throw in the opiate crisis. And so one of the things we saw after Tent City, I had the privilege of starting at the city right in 2018 at the height of it, was observing that people who were housed couldn't maintain their housing because of their challenges around their mental health and substance use. And the other piece in the UK that I saw when I was a teenager and then in my 20s was similar to here, the closure of different institutions. You know, Ronald Reagan and Maggie Thatcher had a similar kind of approach. Riverview closed soon after I arrived in Canada. The other piece that's really key is in Europe, and we looked at this in donut economics as we tried to make the donut meet this scale, is local governments here don't have the mandate or the funding. So in Bristol, England, where I'm from, councils make decisions around foster care, education, and all that integration, which makes donut economics work so much more smoothly. Here, we have the federal and provincial governments that hold the funding and the mandates for health and housing. So it leads us in a very different realm at municipalities. And fundamentally, for us to follow some of those European models is to restructure Canada in some ways. And I'm not saying that's a bad idea, but it's one of the reasons why some of those cities, and we looked at this quite closely with donut economics, and luckily I had a chance to speak to Kate Rayworth about the structure of North American municipalities, particularly Canadian ones, versus the ones in the Netherlands and Germany, where donut economics and both that health and housing piece work. So it's kind of interesting because some of the models that you see in Europe, if we were able to get that funding and mandate, because otherwise we're taxing taxpayers twice. We've got the provincial government paying, we're paying them to provide basically infrastructure, housing, and healthcare. And then local governments, if we don't get that delegated to us, we're then taxing them again to provide that ourselves. One of the good things that came out of Tent City is weekly meetings with BC Housing. Like, our relationship with BC Housing is very strong. And our staff meet with them, well, I think they still do. I used to meet every Wednesday morning, and some staff meet 2 or 3 times a week. Sure, would we like to see things faster? Absolutely. But keeping people housed isn't, in our context, unfortunately, isn't as simple as even shelters or supportive housing. It's actually something more akin to the health. So I hope you don't mind me sharing those perspectives, but Dave, you were speaking to me as you were observing the different pieces, because this is something I've wrestled with here and also in a tiny place like Powell River. So thank you for giving me the chance to share that.
Thank you, Lisa. That's a really great perspective. And I know in no way is this intended to be a criticism of what our city staff has been doing in the past and the good work that they've done. But I think it's becoming increasingly clear that if we want to make a significant difference, we have to do things differently. And if we're not prepared to take that chance, some would say that risk, to do things differently, I don't think we're going to get ahead of the challenge. And so I think part of what we've been talking about, Dave and I are fortunate to have a small group of people, which we call the Housing Working Group, that's growing and had some excellent discussions at the table. If we don't challenge our community to do it differently, I don't think we're going to make the progress that we need to make. One of the ideas that we've put on the table, and this table's heard about it, is having a director of housing for the city of Nanaimo. A unique position, maybe sets us apart from lots of other municipalities, but that person, sole task would be to drive the provision of non-market housing and market housing for our community. So it's unique, and we wouldn't know for sure whether it worked or not. And yes, there's some costs attached to it, but if we don't do some things differently, we're not going to win. And in my mind, what comes from that person's desk at the end of the day is a pipeline of properties that we identify, maybe it's 15 or 20 projects that we identify in our city that are going to take us to that end goal of reducing the number of people that are without housing. And then we collectively need to lean on both other levels of government to get funding and support for those projects. But if we don't push hard with solutions in hand, so we're not just saying, hey, you guys got to do this, here's how you can do it, I think that's what it's going to take to make a difference. And so my suggestion to this table is I would really like to make a recommendation from this table to council to reconsider Housing First Plus and how we can do things differently by supporting city staff for perhaps another position. So,
Thank you. And before I go to anybody else, I'm going to, because, there's a political level to this, obviously, and then it's an operational matter. And so I'm looking at Ms. Bopel saying, in terms of an operational matter, perhaps a response both as to what we're doing now and what could or may be done differently, and, putting in an even rougher spot, what could we do differently and perhaps better?
Yeah, through the chair, this is a really interesting one because I'll share with you, I created a city development manager in Powell River. And there was a reason why I did that. A much smaller city. I didn't have a real estate department. Here we have one. I didn't have, it was a pivot of the long-range planning piece. So here at this city, I was in a small city of 15,000, which was very property rich. Powell River has 150 municipally owned properties, some of substantial size, not always near for servicing. And our challenge is the funding. So a very different context. So interesting, a really interesting concept that you're suggesting, because that's something that was just filled before I left Powell River. And we also kind of thought outside the box about who we needed, a blend of a planner / real estate person, right? And part of that was because I looked at what Nanaimo had and what we've been able to do with agreements with BC Housing. Some of what you're talking about after Tent City really catapulted us into a different relationship with BC Housing, thankfully, and meant that we basically started providing the function of here's land with council's approval that we have, and here's what we can bring to the table. What can you then pony up, right? That kind of matching between governments, and that's what you see with some of the modest. Has it been fast enough? No. we would have liked to have seen 4 or 5 things built, but you've seen 3, pretty much, maybe 4 built since 2018. And so that's really interesting, because in a smaller city, that was exactly what I did. But when I come back here, and this is up to council, you can decide, we have a full-on real estate department that's actually allowed us to do some pretty innovative things, including land swaps and exchanges. And, you know, instead of just even one person, there's a little team of 3 or 4. And that's really important. And they work hand and in sync with the other departments. And then, yeah, I mean, could we always appreciate more staff? Absolutely. I would say that both Dale Lindsay and Jeremy Holm, and then Lisa Brinkman, and of course Dale's now the CAO, and he wasn't quite there before I left, and then myself, we had 4 of us all driving those housing first conversations. Now, they're not always public. And one of the things I did when I went to Powell River, a lovely guy by the name of John McEwen, who was quite senior in BC Housing until he got snapped up by Burnaby to run their housing corporation. And I said to him, hey, I'm in Powell River, and you know, we've been working pretty well in Nanaimo with our weekly meetings and all the different things that we're doing directly. But I said, in Powell River, I just have different bandwidth and capacity, and council would like to explore creating a housing development corporation. And I said, in your mind, would this make it easier? Because you guys come with the big money. Would it make it easier for you to work with us if we created this, versus us having more regular meetings and coming up with council's direction more directly, rather than going through an entity that then has to make a recommendation to council about what land? And he said, quite honestly, Lisa, it's way easier working directly. And I was like, oh, okay, interesting. Okay, now, that being said, that city development manager, part of her tasks will be to explore the pros and cons for a small community for return on investment on creating a whole new structure, paying a new ED, all the staff and all of that. You're suggesting something different though. You're suggesting something internal. And I think the evaluation would be, what more would another position do than what we're currently doing? Would it be able to do more? Would it, you know, it's a good question, because this city has way more resources than I had to play with. And so the creation of that position with this lovely, and I'm sure she's going to do great work. I've actually seen a couple of her presentations so far. But she's like a blend of the former Bill Corson, Jeremy Holm, and Dale Lindsay. And that's what we need her to be. But she is playing the role of probably 8 positions that already exist here. So but I find it fascinating because, and what I called it was city development manager. Right? And the intention was not to call it housing, because there's times, if I say in Powell River, that I wanted her to look at partnerships that were a blend, not just housing, but housing with commercial, housing with other uses, to leverage private-public partnerships, right? So anyway, she's wearing a lot of hats, and I have great hopes for her up there. But Powell River is a land-rich municipality. Nanaimo comparatively is not, interestingly. So it gives us less to barter with. Anyway, just thoughts to throw into the mix.
Thank you. Dave?
Thanks, Lisa. I think a couple of things, going back to basic foundation of conversation. So Nanaimo does have an advantage, and the advantage is it has people like you, and it has staff, Bill, that are doing really solid work, that are committed to addressing this issue. There's no question about that. No question. And we often talk about, that foundation, hey, Bob, that people are really committed to doing what you can. Unfortunately, that reality, and there's no question, in my report, I don't know if you read it, but anyway, I talk about the cantons in Switzerland are totally different. They have income tax, they have corporate tax, and they have different levels of tax. And so some like Zurich, funny, that's how it's pronounced, Zurich, have decided they don't want to have any taxes because they want to compete with Basel in terms of getting investment. So so you have these differences. Does Zurich have homeless? No, they don't. Anyway, but the reality of local government is that our structure is made, and you've heard me say this before, for 1867, not 2025. And our whole tax system is, you can't fund 80% of the people on property tax. This is nonsense. So we need to revolutionize that. But you know what? We spend our time, we're gonna go around and spinning. So when we have our conversations, we go, oh my God, it'd be great if we could just do a magic wand. And I talked about that 1% of the GST. I'm still convinced that should be directed to local government. But anyway, here we go. But we come down to where we are today. And we talk about this a lot. Our focus needs to be turning off the homeless tap. It's like a big faucet. It's just pouring them out, right? 1% of our population compared to all of Switzerland, 0.02%. This is nonsense. So those disparities cause me to say that, notwithstanding the fact that our local government structure is not in a good position to deal with this, notwithstanding the fact that provincial and federal governments are mandated to deal with this, notwithstanding the fact that Nanaimo can't afford to be leading this financially, it cannot afford not to lead it. There's two different things there that I said, right? It can't afford to lead it financially, but it cannot afford not to lead. Because if we don't lead in this discussion, it will only get worse. I've just done too much work in this area now. So having said that, we need to turn off the homeless tap. My God, I get off the plane on Monday night, go to bed late Monday. I have a meeting, typically witty, Tuesday morning, right? So I'm walking to the meeting, and I'm 5 minutes out of my condo, and there's a young man, 20 years old, reasonably well-dressed. Give me a break. This is just before noon. Come on. 5 minutes. I'm in the community 5 minutes. 12 days I'm in Poland. I see one. 5 minutes. What does that tell us? Well, we're not doing things right. So it seems to me that, and we have this housing working group, great conversations, that we're talking about, all right, at the very least, folks, to turn off that homeless tap, we need to have affordable housing. People need to be housed, and that's what they tell you in Switzerland, and that's what they say in Finland, that's what they say in Germany, although Germany don't do it through social housing, they do it through subsidy. And you notice I didn't talk about the UK. I don't talk about the UK at all, because it is not a model for us. I never refer to it. Don't look at it. They're screwed up there. So I want to look at places that are succeeding. And it's not like we're going to replicate them. We can't. The structures are different. Financially, we're different. But we can learn lessons. We can learn lessons. And the lesson of the Swiss and the Finns and the Swedes and the Germans is fundamentally keep people housed. Keep them housed so they don't end up on the street. Because when they're on the street, they know what, and the other thing is we know what it costs. And if you read my report, $21.5 million in 2023 spent in Nanaimo, all levels of government, to keep people on the street. That's a lot of money. And then we're not going to turn that tap off and save that money right away, but over 20 years we sure are. So it's a long-term thing as well. Anyway, all of that to say that I believe we have to be open to exploring lessons from elsewhere. I said that earlier, that's how I built my practice. You can't replicate everything, but boy, you can get some solid ideas. And those solid ideas can lead to small successes. Small successes to lead to more successes, lead to more successes. Absolutely fundamentally believe that, because if we don't examine this in a really comprehensive, deep way, it will just continue, and we just kind of, okay, accept that this is a new normal. But by God, it should not be a new normal. Thanks.
Thank you, and I'm just going to try and close this off because we could talk about this all day, and I'm not being dismissive when I say that. But let me tell you what I heard, and I won't say learned because I've had this view for a very long time. At the UBCM this year in Victoria, I mean, I talked to numerous politicians from across the province. I attended and spoke at the Safe Streets rally, et cetera, and my discussion with Julian Daly yesterday and others I've had recently all confirm, and all of us are asking the same question. When I say all of us, those of us who enjoy elected municipal office or involved in social agencies, et cetera, and this is the most frustrating thing of all. Notwithstanding that many of us use the same language, the crisis in our streets is the crisis of our times. I mean, there's always some major issue in society at any given moment that takes priority. None of us can answer why the provincial government in particular, because it has the most jurisdiction, the federal government to a lesser extent, why this isn't a bigger political priority. Dave, if you can answer that question and move where the blockage is, you'll be the plumber extraordinaire, the roto-rooter of modern society. But right now, honestly, and I confess, I mean, over and over again, is it a cabal in the Premier's office? Is it the advisors he has? Is it the caucus? Is it the influence of experts, or what is it? But nobody can understand why it hasn't moved, and I've said this over and over again. I'm tired of saying it. You know, the provincial election, and I state this publicly, and I'm conscious this meeting is available to everybody, the provincial government basically lost the last election. You went from a significant number of seats down to being, you know, for the sake of a few hundred votes sprinkled in the right places, being the official opposition. I would have thought, given what many of us had said to provincial politicians, et cetera, what the polling said, what the public meetings indicated, that would have really shaken you up as a government. The language I heard is the Premier referred to it as a near-death experience. Well, it clearly wasn't as near-death enough as it is. Now, there's a provincial budget coming, and I've said that year after year for the last 5 or 6 years that we would see something significant. And I get we're in some fiscally challenging times, but I remind every British Columbian, and the anti-tax folks will hate me for saying this, notwithstanding the concerns about the deficit in this province this year, which is extraordinary, nevertheless, our debt to GDP ratio compared to many other places and provinces is still very good. I'm not advocating spending money willy-nilly, but having said all that, I still can't understand what the reluctance is, because politically, because of what I hear in the grocery store and what I hear in the streets and what I talk to everybody about and what we're talking about this morning, boy, it's the topic on everyone's lips. And I would think, you know, in the world of politics that I grew up in, if people were talking about it and you could fix it, that might be a smart thing to do, because you might actually get elected and reelected. But right now, I come back to it, and I'm being a bit, you know, funny and facetious when I talk about Roto-Rooter. What's the blockage? I don't get it, and I got to tell you, brighter, older, some younger, more experienced, less experienced politicians across this province are all asking the same question. And I don't know what it's going to take to move it, Bob, and you talk about innovative approaches, et cetera, but at the end of the day, as you know from our discussions the other day and previous discussions, where we're short, and you acknowledged it this morning, where we're short in terms of housing is the social housing. It's not the private sector, you know, we're still doing well, buildings are going up all over the place relative to many other communities. But it's the government, and anyways, here endeth my frustration for the morning. Does anyone have anything else they wish to say on this topic? I mean, I know that I can state for the record, you and Bob have made a very strong pitch on behalf of your housing group. You've had a chance to listen to Ms. Bopel sing this morning, and certainly she's very conscious of the issues. Not saying yea or nay, whether there's a willingness on council to consider that, I think is really up to council, and if we can do something better. But as I say, I remain somewhat optimistic because this session clearly of the legislature, we're not going to see any significant improvement in my respectful opinion. So what comes in the spring? Is it an austerity budget? Is it, you know, we don't move forward? Is there a recognition in the throne speech that British Columbians have spoken with a very clear voice that this is the crisis and issue of our times? I don't know. Anyways, thanks for listening. If this was peanuts, I'd give all of you a nickel for the psychiatric advice, but there is no greater frustration than to be mayor in a community that has so much going for it with so many talented people, and you can't get past the thing that everyone wants to talk about. Anyways, other business, upcoming meeting. We're scheduled in theory for November the 7th, but for what it's worth, my inclination is to say no, because looking at Colin and Donna, that we may be, is there, and don't let me force or be pushy on this, please. I'd be happy to hear from anybody else. Donna.
My feedback and request would be if you could please give us a bit more time to host our next event and start on the working document, that would be great. Then we'd have a more fulsome update. And then the other thing I would request is that so if we move this to near the end of November, I'd also ask that I be able to give a healthcare update and what's going on with that conversation at the next meeting.
I was just going to say, let me just check and see. What is it? Is it the... yeah, the health summit's on the 13th, so after the 13th of November.
Yeah, if we could, as you said, I'm speaking at that, and Vancouver Island Economic Alliance being next week, we also have a healthcare piece happening there. So I think after we have, I think it would be appropriate to an update on the healthcare piece as well at that time.
A lot of activity. Do we want to pick a date now, or do you?
Your Worship, if I can,
Bill?
I will note that we're rolling into budget discussions, which is 2 or 3 meetings a week for the next several weeks, or starting in late October. So it may need to shift to the new year, just as a heads up for the next particular meeting. The other thing that I'd be reluctant to see is just having a meeting for the sake of having a meeting. Yeah.
Well, perhaps, I mean, I'm hesitant. We can always set it and cancel. I'm just thinking maybe early December. Is that reasonable?
I think my other comment is we promised council an update at the end of the year. So if we don't have another meeting about where we're at in process, we won't be ready to present to council. Now, I get that we're probably going to be bumped to beginning of the new year of council, but at least we'd be prepared for that meeting then. My only comment.
Regular council meetings December 15th. The week before, it's...
Your Worship, we've got a few different meetings that week, so probably the only option might be December 12th, the Friday.
How does December 12th look, folks?
Sadly won't work for me, but I'm off to Europe, sorry.
Somehow you're not eliciting the sympathy by making that statement that one would expect.
It's a little bit of brag planning.
Oh, that was very good. 12th works. December 12th? Agreed?
Or should we can ask staff to just send out a poll to the entire table?
That would be nice. All right. Next item will be a motion to adjourn, but let me just say this morning, as always, how much I appreciate the work of all of you and the continued energy and passion you bring to this. I want to thank staff for the hospitality and their work this morning. There's coffee and some goodies back there, and welcome again to Ms. Bhopal Singh, Mr. Stansfield. Always appreciate Bill, everyone. So motion to adjourn. Moved Donna, seconded Bob. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you.